And we're rolling. Camera tilt. Okay. Here we are.
Right. So
we're calling this the Paris Writers Salon. This is the first longer form video we're doing. And in order to do a longer form video, we have to have the right theme, right? Something that warrants a longer discussion. We've talked a lot about the writing life. And I'd like to know, for you, what the difference is between writing, between being a writer, and then living a writer's life.
Well, ideally, they should be the same thing. You should be able to be a writer and live the writer's life, but the truth is you don't, do you? The writer's life is a fantasy. It's a fiction. And it's what attracts people, I'm sure, to writing. In the first instance, the thought of the difference between just writing things and being a writer is you have a fantasy and you try and fill that.
And what is that fantasy in the popular?
I remember actually the moment when I did this. I remember it was. I'd written a couple. This was when I was like 19. I'd written some stories, and I'd sent off various things to magazines in England, mainly letters of comment and so on. So I'd got to know the editor of this magazine, and I happened to be in a remote country town in Australia with nothing to do for the weekend. And I thought, I'll write a story, because the stories this guy is publishing are just not that good. I could do as well. And so I wrote a story and I sent it to him entirely as a joke. Even I can write a better story than you've been publishing. And he sent me a cheque. And I remember standing in the street in Sydney outside the post office, where I used to have a post office box, and staring at this and thinking, but this is wrong. I'm not a writer. I'm a fan. I comment. I joke about it.
You were 19 years old.
Exactly. I'm not a writer. Writers are, and I thought, what do writers do? I mean, what does a writer look like? I didn't know any.
Yeah.
But I did have a friend who worked for a magazine, and so I went to him and I said, "Listen, you're from New York. You know how these things are. How do you become a writer?" And he kind of looked at me blankly, And I said, "Well, I've seen the movies. Writers in movies, they get up in the morning quite late. They come down, they have breakfast. Then they might sit there in their robe or something like that. They might scribble a few lines, maybe. Then they'll go to lunch, and then they'll go out to dinner and various."
Quite a refined lifestyle.
That's the writer's life to me. And he said, "Well, it's not quite like that." And as the first step, actually, he said, "If you want to be a writer, come and work with me on the magazine." And I said, "Well, fine." So I quit my job and I went to work on the magazine, and I learned what being a writer is really like. And it's very different, but I still kept that.
And what was this magazine?
It was what used to be called a girly magazine, a men's magazine. Okay. It was called Squire. And my job was what you do on a magazine like that. My first job was actually writing the captions under the pictures of the naked ladies.
Really?
Yeah, it's an art.
Were you inventing the quotes? Like Cindy from Texas.
Well, exactly. That's what you had to do, because most of these women were very ordinary women doing this as a part-time thing. They were secretaries and paralegals and so on. And in fact, the first one I did, I just wrote what the truth was. She was a paralegal and she was here. And I gave it to the editor. And he said, "What use is this? I can't use this." And I said, "Well, that's who she is." He said, "I don't care who she is. I mean, I want something that the readers will respond to." He said, "Bright writing, John, bright writing. That's what we want." So I went away and I thought, all right. So I invented again, like the writer's life, I invented the model's life. What would her ideal life be if she was a model? And so I said, her name was Sensualdo Latour. She came from Martinique and she collected tropical fish and so on and so on. And I gave it to the editor, and he said, "Yeah, this is not bad. You'll probably have a future in this business." But again, I was selling as they say, sell the sizzle, not the steak.
Yeah.
What about you? Did you have an image of what the writer was?
I did, yeah. I mean, growing up, the image of the writer was this kind of brooding character that spends a lot of time by themselves. I think I had heard a lot about writers having drinking problems and drug problems, especially growing up in the 90s, early 2000s. That was kind of, in popular culture, the idea behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you felt you should become addicted before you could actually...
for years, I thought that was the key to being a good writer, was some kind of serious trauma or otherwise addiction that you were thus trying to write your way through. I remember there's only one author, I think it was Michael Chabon, this author, who said, you don't have to have trauma to be a good writer, but it certainly helps. And then I wondered for years whether or not I should even be attempting it, because I couldn't really locate any serious traumas that I had had that pushed me to write. I really liked to write just to escape. We were talking about Harry Potter earlier, but even Tolkien and all the fantasy books of childhood, just being able to be in a different world was the main reason why, when I realized first time I could create it myself, didn't have a check or anything associated with it, but just...
Do you remember specifically when that was?
I remember when I was very young, 6 or 7, I wrote a book of poems it was based off of Shel Silverstein's poems, I did a drawing, and then I would use this kind of abstract language to just imagine these kind of surreal worlds. And I just remember spending hours on it and being kind of enamored with the world that I was able to inhabit. I loved Legos as a kid, too. I would build Lego cities and invent, narratives in the worlds, Playmobil, all that. So when I got to start creating those worlds myself, I think that was the first kind of light bulb moment, is I don't have to focus on anything going outside in the real world, because I can have my own little universe within my own head. And
Actually, it's funny you mentioned Shel Silverstein, who I admired as well, but for his cartoons. And I remember a cartoon in particular. It's a group of people sitting in a coffee lounge in Greenwich Village, which was a popular subject with him. And in the middle was a rather sad-looking guy, looking very depressed. And another guy saying, "Okay, George commits suicide. You write the piece about it for the Village Voice. You write the screenplay about it. You do the poem about it. You do the."
Yeah.
So all of them were sort of cutting up this guy's life, and I thought, yeah, that's in a way what you do when you become a writer. You think, where's my material? And you're looking for stuff that will inspire you.
For sure. And that, of course, the things that are right in front of your nose are usually the hardest to see, usually because it's yourself. That for me, writing, it's taken years. Continues too, but trying to find inspiration around the world and looking for people's crazy stories about, traversing oceans, etc. Then you realize, wait a minute, I've been sitting in my home with my mom or my dad or my brother or myself for these years, and there are stories there too. You just... you don't want to look at them until you're ready to understand them. There's a Baldwin quote, tangential, but he speaks about his father, who was a very angry man because of the challenges of Jim Crow South, and then just the rampant racism throughout the U.S. And Baldwin says, that hate as an emotion is useful, because oftentimes it seems to me, once you stop hating, you have to start dealing with your own fears. And hate is easier to have than fear. But I also think losing yourself in fantasy land is much easier to do than to actually look at yourself and to recognize yourself as somebody who has flaws and has their own hang-ups, which it can take you 20 years, 30 years, it can take you 100 years. It depends on... We all know people who at 65 still kind of act in a way you say, you never really got out of high school, did you?
No.
And similarly, people who are 20 that seem like they've been here for 2 centuries. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think that the hardest thing I had to do, in a way, was begin writing about my own life after having spent decades writing about the lives of others. I've written all these biographies of people. I'd written a lot of fiction, published a lot of fiction. I'd never written anything about myself. And then I happened to accidentally, in a way, start writing about myself when I was asked to do a book about book collecting. And I put in some stories about my own experience. And people were interested. And from that came a whole stream of books about my my life. But up until then, I hadn't wanted.
And when was that? It
was when I was living in Paris. It was only about. Gosh, I suppose it's like 20 years ago, something like that. Yes.
Did you find growing into yourself as a writer that the biographies you were most interested in had kind of kernels of truth about yourself? I mean, and the characters you were studying. Did you see it that way almost as a platform to start looking at yourself differently via the George Lucas's or Fellini's of the world?
Not really. I think what they say about no man is a hero to his valet. In a way, no person is a hero to his biographer. So I think I was looking for people about whom there were secrets, about whom there were puzzles, mysteries, and so on. And so I chose people that, in a way, were quite remote from my experience. Certainly, Federico Fellini and I have hardly anything in common, actually, even though I got on very well with him.
Okay.
And that's true, I think, of most of the people I've written about. What has interested me is the difference.
Yeah.
When I write about myself, then the tone is very different. I can be very forensic writing about somebody, but writing about myself, I seem to have no perspective at all.
Okay, right. Well, yeah, but that's, as you mentioned, what people seem to like as well. Your books in the last 20 years have been largely about your own time in Paris.
Yeah, and I was surprised that people would be interested in that. I thought maybe I should delve more deeply in my life. I should find, the sort of the dark corners and so on. Well, I didn't. The only time I've done that is when I published a self-published collection of pieces that I'd written for the Paris Men's Salon, where we were asked to talk about our own lives, and for the first time I was writing about my own life from a very analytical point of view.
Okay, so without giving too much away for a future episode about it, just this Paris Men's Salon, this is a group of men that get together to discuss...
Well, discuss question mark, yes. Well, it's an idea of a friend of mine, Charles de Groot. He's a wealthy American, retired to Paris, and the way he described it, he said, I'm always going to dinner parties, and I don't have anybody to talk to, because not that many people are interested in what I'm interested in. So I thought I would have a dinner party with nothing but people that I wanted to talk to.
Okay. So
he chose a group of us, 7 of us, from very widely separated ways of life. And originally every month or so we would meet at his home. We would have dinner, and just before, a few days beforehand, he would set a subject.
Interesting.
To be the subject of the conversation. Okay. And